To comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, pedestrian facilities in the public right-of-way must be readily accessible to and usable by people with disabilities. Measuring the properties of sidewalks, specifically sidewalks where they cross curbs at street corners, to assess their compliance with the ADA is a complicated process. While not all intersections have as many attributes to measure, even the simplest of intersections can require the recording of a minimum of 20 measurements or observations per corner. At more complex intersections, those having islands, medians, and/or pedestrian signals, as many as 100 measurements or observations per corner may be required. Often, the observer must notice and document the absence of accessible features or the presence of anomalies that are barriers to access for some pedestrians with disabilities and potential hazards for pedestrians who do not have disabilities. At an intersection. The process of surveying the accessibility features of an intersection begins with general observations of the intersection, including intersection type, traffic signals present, number of approaches, number of stop signs, road classification, other attribute or observation. Each corner of an intersection may be unique in its own way. The following elements should be surveyed: sidewalks, curb ramps, blended transitions, pedestrian signals, crosswalks, islands, medians, walking surfaces, protrusions, gratings, track crossings. Curb ramp observations. Each curb ramp requires a variety of observations and measurements. Some of the observable attributes of a curb ramp are: accumulates water, crosswalk present or marked, detectable warnings, ramp type, diagonal or directional, surface material, gaps or level changes. Measurements include the slopes of curb ramp surfaces, counter, cross, running, left flare, right flare, landing. Dimensional measurements are made for curb ramp length, curb ramp width, landing length, landing width, width of gap, height of level change. Blended transition features. Blended transitions connect walkways to streets with slopes not greater than 1 to 20 or 5%. Running, cross, and counter slopes must be measured. The running and cross slopes of the walking surfaces that approach the blended transition must also be measured. All surfaces must be observed for accumulates water, crosswalk present or marked, detectable warnings, type, diagonal or directional, surface material, gaps or level changes. The vertical change in levels and width of gaps must be measured. Crosswalk assessment. A crosswalk should be marked, though this is not always the case. At marked crosswalks, observe whether or not the curb ramp or blended transition is within the width of the crosswalk. Measure marked crosswalks for cross slope, running slope, width. Where pedestrian signals are present, also measure the curb-to-curb length of the crosswalk. Pedestrian signal best practices. Each pedestrian signal requires a variety of observations and measurements. Some of the observable attributes of a pedestrian signal are APS control face, parallel to crossing, audible APS present, push-button locator tone, push-button contrast colors, vibrotactile signals present. Dimensional measurements are made for parallel clearance, perpendicular clearance, control force, height of pedestrian control push button, length of crossing, push button size, distance to nearest other APS control, duration of walk interval. Note that the parallel and perpendicular clearances, along with the height of the push button, are used to determine whether the pedestrian control is within reach range of individuals with mobility limitations, including those who use wheelchairs. The dimension between pedestrian controls is measured to determine whether people who are blind or have low vision can easily identify and locate the control for each street crossing. The length of the crossing and the duration of the walk interval are used to calculate whether sufficient time is provided for individuals with mobility limitations, including those who use wheelchairs, to safely cross streets. This video is a sample intended to show you the detailed process of accessibility in the public right-of-way. Implementation of these guidelines is of economic benefit to public entities and ensures that barriers to access will be removed for all pedestrians in our communities. For more information and further training, contact the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and Meeting the Challenge.